Hi there, welcome to this episode of A Rail Ride in Time. We're going to be taking a rail ride in time on the Swansea and Mumbles Railway. It's the dawn of the 19th century. The United Kingdom is awash with sounds of industry. The Industrial Revolution is racing forwards, needing to be fed by vast amounts of raw materials required to keep the momentum of both production and development. South Wales, with its vast swaths of mineral and coal mines, is one such place. This is where the Swansea and Mumbles Railway was born, showing the drive and ingenuity displayed across the country at this time. A group of innovators were to produce an idea that could arguably be described as the biggest transport development since the wheel. It is the early 1800s, and like the rest of Wales, the Port of Swansea is busy carrying raw materials such as coal and copper, limestone and other materials from this region to the rest of Britain and across the world. The mines around Mumbles need to get their wares to port for delivery to the customers. At this time, the options were limited. The nearest port was Swansea. So was the nearest canal. The only option was by road. This method was terribly slow and difficult to move substantial amounts of goods needed to feed the appetites of industry. There were suggestions of a canal to stretch from Mumbles to Swansea, but this was dramatically opposed. One opposition was the Swansea Harbour Trust, which was looking to build a pier at Mumbles that could take goods straight from there and extend the ability to carry more goods. A canal would cut through and disrupt the wharfs that they were building. The Swansea Canal were also concerned that any new canal would deprive them of water. Lastly, there were the colliery heads in this area that they feared would face fierce competition for cheap coal being brought in from elsewhere. A basic railway system was already being used in many other areas of the country, and the idea was formed to create a railway to get the limestone and other materials to the port of Swansea. Hearing of the run of a goods train by a steam locomotive built by Richard Trevithick from the Penydarren to Abercynon in 1804, Edward Martin came up with the idea of building a tramroad. On the 29th of June 1804, Parliament enacted the Oystermouth Railway to allow for the making and maintaining of a railway or tramroad from the town of Swansea into the parish of Oystermouth in the county of Glamorgan. This would become known as the Swansea and Mumbles Railway. Starting in Rutland Street in Swansea, it followed the coastline and finished at Mumbles Pier, with a branch going from Mumbles Road in Blackpill to two collieries just to the west of that location. Why was this the great leap in transportation that the introduction claims it to be, if there was already industrial and mine railways in operation? Firstly, it was the foresight shown by Edward Martin when he took the bill. In the bill, it was written that the hauling or drawing should be done by men, horses, or otherwise. It was the otherwise that showed the vision of the man. This one word that meant that as technology advanced, the railway company could change the form of motive power without the need for Parliament. The second aspect happened in 1807. In 1807, the Swansea and Mumbles Railway became the first in the world to carry fare-paying passengers, predating the Stockton and Darlington Railway by nearly 20 years, which would be the first railway to haul passengers by steam. These railways also had the method in which they were managed in common. Unlike the railways of today, which managed both the line, or permanent way, and the rolling stock, carriages, wagons, etc., these two railways were done at the start. Like many innovative technologies before and after them, they used what was around for inspiration. At the time, the only things that were comparable were the canals and the toll roads. These ran pretty much as they do today. The company would own the route, and customers would pay a charge to run their vehicles along the route. This would eventually prove to be unworkable, especially as traffic built up, and later this would change. It was under these conditions, however, that one of the shareholders, Benjamin French, agreed to pay the railway £20 per annum to run a wagon or wagons at the line for the conveyance of passengers. For the cost of 1 shilling, any person could share a carriage with 15 others for an approximately 5-mile journey along the line. Although, as one student from Chicago University pointed out, this could be enhanced to 22 passengers in the case of people being accommodating or harsh weather, as was the case with her. After a ride, she decided to sketch the wagon and horse in her own journal, and as can be seen from the picture, it looks extremely basic and may well have been an old goods wagon converted. But one thing it did have in its favour was that it was covered, unlike many carriages used by the railways in the early days. This may have been because the passengers that were expected to use the line were of a higher status. Fare of 1 shilling was probably beyond that of most residents in the area, which would have had much better things to spend 1 shilling on than a 5-mile carriage journey. The right to move passengers this way then passed the hands to various members of the shareholders committee, eventually ending up in the hands of Simon Llewellyn, who we know had it in 1826 due to him advertising in the Cambrian newspaper, something that was very unusual if not unique. This was possibly due to a turnpike road being built in the area, and with him selling land at Swansea Quay meant the new road was winning at the time. Now, this is probably sounding like a period of profit and growth for the Swansea and Mumbles, but this was not necessarily the case. As many new railway companies were to find out over the following 200 years, railways are expensive to build. It cost £9,000 at the time to build it, around about £780,000 today. But when you start looking at the prices of HS2, you think that's not a lot. But remember, this is only 5 miles of railway. By March in 1812, the railway had been mortgaged to keep it running, with John Morris, a son of one of the founders, acting as the mortgage holder's agent. It is probable they had paid the mortgage off by 1825, as this was when he gave his final account of his actions. There's little evidence of what occurred during the next 30 years, despite the company producing a carriage capable of carrying more passengers, now 16, with 1 horse in 1823. The mineral traffic they did have was meagre, and the railway just ticked over. The passenger trade fell off as well with the opening of the turnpike from the Oyster Mouth to Swansea, as was mentioned before. We do know from other sources, such as the Cambrian newspaper, that there was storm damage to the track in 1838 and 1846, and repairs to the line were organised. In 1854, a directory lists John Gwyn Jeffreys as a clerk to the tramway, which would suggest the company did still exist. Things changed for the railway when George Bing Morris took over the reins. He refused to acknowledge any of the other shareholders, and this caused some upset, but was not pushed too hard. He started off by replacing the old L-shaped rails with those that we know today, and reset the gauge to 4 for 8.5 inches, the standard gauge for most of the country. This was all completed by 1860, and a passenger service was resumed. From the carriages he's used, it's possible that it was aiming for a greater variety of passengers. There was one that was basic metal floor with benches fitted and no roof, possibly for lower grade passengers, and a robust covered double-decker for the more affluent passenger. By 1865, the traffic had picked up to 8 trains a day. This sort of regularity allowed for people of Mumbles to be able to commute to Swansea. There is a tale of a Mr. Harncorn travelling back from Mumbles from Swansea after a day of work, and after he found the last second-class carriage was full, decided he was going to take the first class instead, but didn't want to pay the extra fee. However, the current chair, Mr. Robert Williams, just happened to be on there at the time, and after hearing this, as you can imagine, he was not happy about this, and it is reported that he yanked Mr. Harncorn out by the lapels and abused him roundly. By the late 19th century, things had changed dramatically in the area. Industry and development had took hold of Swansea, and the arrival of the Great Western Railway in the 1850s had brought fast transport to the city, for both passengers and raw materials coming out of the mines and quarries. During this time, other smaller railways had also crept into Swansea from all sides, enabling passengers and goods to head to almost anywhere in Great Britain. To keep up with the new fast-paced transport, the Swansea and Mumbles Railway would need to adapt if they were to survive. In 1804 and then in 1807, the railway was a pioneer in transport, but during the rest of the early 19th century, it had kept going with the same old system. If you're enjoying this episode of Rail Riding Time, then please remember to hit the like and subscribe button and click that notification bell to ensure you don't miss any further episodes. This needed to change. As I said at the beginning of this, at first the railway was run like a toll road, with anyone being able to use the railway as and when they liked by paying a toll and using their own equipment. This could be any person, horse or other. After this method was tried on the Stockton to Darlington Railway, it was seen as the least effective way and caused many problems. With the opening of the Liverpool to Manchester Railway in 1835 and just about every other railway after that, a different method was used. The customer paid for the company to move the goods. This allowed for more efficient scheduling to happen, cutting down on potential problems. For example, under the old system, it was not unusual for a man to be pushing a goods wagon one way to meet a horse-drawn coach coming the other. With the rails, there's no way to move to the side as you would on the road. It had to be determined who moved backwards to a passing point. Quite often this was settled with fisticuffs. By 1877, Major George Grant Francis had built up an extensive tramway service around Swansea and looked to incorporate the Swansea and Mumbles Railway into the fold. He did this by leasing the running powers of the line. With this change came the introduction of steam to the railway. The feeling from the town was apprehensive. Having a steam locomotive moving around could potentially be dangerous. Animals might get scared and start to bolt. This is a common theme around about the early time of the railways. To reduce the fears of the local townsfolk, a trial run was arranged with the new locomotive being supplied by Hughes and Sons. A lot of technology went into the locomotive to help ease people's minds. It had superior brakes. This would ensure that it could stop efficiently. At around 8 miles per hour, it could stop within its own distance, around about 13 feet. It also had a speed limiter on it to make sure it didn't go over that 8 miles an hour. But to really make sure it was going to be safe and it would not startle animals or anything around town, the Cambrian newspaper stated that the railway company had many high-spirited animals come next to the engine while it was at rest, and others when it was under steam. Even the most high-spirited of them didn't seem bothered by it at all. So it was all steam ahead then. No. By 1877, a gentleman named John Dickinson, a bankrupt, had somehow managed to establish himself as a real owner. In 1878, he insisted that Major Francis could only use horse-drawn transport, despite the Act itself stating that it could be powered by people, horse, or other means. Legal wrangling continued until 1896, when the last horse-drawn tram was removed from the line. During this time, there were steam trains hauling passengers and freight along the line, but not the trams. I will let you make up your minds as to why John Dixon insisted on the horse-drawn trams that were run by another company. The fact that there is evidence that Dixon would have his locomotive drivers pour hot cinders between the rails, especially when they were being followed by the horse-drawn trams, could give you a clue as to his motives. Steam ran full time on the railway up to 1929. Generally, there were little 040s or 060 saddle tanks. Not big engines, but they were exactly right for what this line needed. It was a small, level line, and they were much loved by the local population and users alike. But change was on the horizon. In 1927, the Tramways Company was merged into the South West Transport Company. By this time, only passengers were being transported along the line. Added to this, electricity was coming and a new power station was being built for the town. This was still standing by 1987, and the whole line was upgraded with new rails, sleepers and electrical lines. This new development allowed trams to become electric, meaning they were cleaner, quieter and a more efficient form of traction. On Saturday the 2nd of March 1929 at 4:30 in the morning, the first electric tram ran across the lines. This new form of power allowed the carriage to contain more passengers at any one time. increasing to 106 passengers per car with the use of double decking. And all the passengers would be sheltered from the weather. This allowed for the railway to maintain an increased service with less rolling stock over the steam and horse previously used. Eventually they ran 13 cars, and with a tram every 8 minutes along the line, it was said they could clear 3,000 people within an hour. By 1945, nearly 5 million passengers were moved over the year, and thought was given to revitalising the Mumbles Pier, giving the Swansea and Mumbles line a golden period over the middle of the 20th century. But this was not to continue. Even though the other trams in the area had succumbed to the motor buses in the town, its unusual route in the area allowed it to continue for a while longer. But the development and increased ownership of motor cars, just like most other railways in the country, were to prove too much for this history-making railway. The railways, no matter how historic or efficient, were seen as old ways, and people wanted the convenience and spectacle of the new cars. Car parks were springing up all round Swansea and down to Mumbles. In 1958 it was decided to close the line finally. The last train ran on the 5th of January 1960 and demolition began straight away. Local historical societies and other interested parties petitioned the council and parliament to save the line, but as most of the local residents of the area were not interested in saving it, these fell flat. Scrap metal dealers, Thomas W. Ward Limited, put out a poster for the sale of scrap from the railway, using a picture of one of the classic horse-drawn trams and its legacy as a selling point, maybe to try and get museums and societies interested in buying some of the memorabilia. This is shown by their statement how generously they would consider sympathetically requests from such places as museums and so on. But the whole poster seems to show that they might not be as generous as they're saying, or they're trying to use it to sell more goods. Today the railway is remembered for its pioneering spirit. It is more than a relic, it's a testament to the human ingenuity, to the power of progress and the enduring connection between the people and place. Remember how this is one of the places where it all started. Technology that dominated and changed our lives during the 19th century and on into the 20th. It was not more than just carrying goods and passengers, it was carrying the dreams and innovation of generations to come. As this episode draws to a close, let's take a moment to remember what these railways brought to us. They're not just old relics and maybe new innovations, they're a link to our industrial technology, a link to the pioneering spirit that came on, and as we'll see in future episodes, more and more pioneering came about and railways sprung up all over the place. Most of these railways are now walkways or cycle paths, but they still show us of where we came from and where we're going to. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story and this rail ride into the history of the Swansea and Mumbles Railway. It's a story of innovation, community and unstoppable momentum of progress. Until the next journey, may your tracks lead you to discovery and wonder.